We're passed.
I thought we were on page 8. I mean 30. Where are we?
We're currently...
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lee.
Gentleman will suspend.
Thank you very much.
The reading is at line 43, line 3.
Page 43.
The paragraph. Operating grants. Line 30.
Page 30. The paragraph begins on page 39.
The paragraph begins on page 39, line 22.
Mr. Chairman, my next amendment is page 43, line 10. Are we there?
Not
yet.
at this time.
Okay.
Clerk will read.
Page 43, line 3, capital and debt service grants to the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, $600 million.
Now, for what purpose the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
It's coming.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia, page 43, line 10, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $600 million. Page 150, line 8, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $600 million.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would decrease the appropriations for Amtrak's capital and debt service grants by $600 million and increase the spending reduction amount by the same amount. It would have the effect of entirely defunding this account. Amtrak was created by Congress in 1970 to provide nationwide passenger rail service. It currently operates more than 40 routes across the United States. Unfortunately, the majority of these routes operate at a huge loss to taxpayers. The committee report for the underlying bill details just how big that loss is. In fiscal year 2011, Amtrak's long-distance routes ran a deficit of $554 million. By next year, that amount is projected to grow to $610 million in losses. Mr. Chairman, the committee also takes note of Amtrak's troubled food and beverage service, which has lost a total of $313 million just over the last 3 years. This year alone, Amtrak is projected to lose nearly $75 million on its food and beverage service, reflecting just a return of only 64% on its expenses. Despite these losses, Amtrak pays the attendants who serve on board food and beverages between $24 and $27 per hour. The committee itself points out that this wage is more than 20% higher than that of flight attendants. And these employees' current labor agreement calls for another 3% increase each year for the next 2 years. Mr. Chairman, this isn't the first time I've come to the floor to talk about Amtrak. And I can say with some confidence that this probably won't be the last. We as a country are broke. Yet we continue to offer hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars each year to a passenger rail line which refuses to make meaningful reforms. The waste here is rampant, and we just cannot afford it anymore. Our nation is broke. We've got to stop spending money we don't have. We have to live within our means, and I urge support of my amendment. Now, you reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman out reserved, he may yield back. The gentleman yields back.
I yield
For purpose, gentleman from Iowa, rise.
I strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment as it would shut down Amtrak. I concede that Amtrak could be more efficient, no doubt about that. However, it has made significant improvements in this area recently, and it is moving in the right direction. The bill does not include arbitrary funding decisions. We held hearings and we have scrubbed every account in this bill. The committee worked very, very hard to achieve balance in the bill within our funding limits, and I urge a no vote on the amendment, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise?
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment.
Gentlelady move to strike the last word.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment is just another example of how the Republican majority is limiting transportation options for the American people. Last year, more than 31 Americans chose Amtrak as the means of transportation to get to business meetings, family gatherings, and vacations. They chose Amtrak to avoid crowded airplanes, congested highways, and for the opportunity to view the wonderful and majestic scenery of this great nation. Americans deserve a passenger rail system that is safe and reliable. This amendment also demonstrates how many members on the other side of the aisle will blindly cut programs, blindly cut funding without any idea of the real ramifications. For instance, I sincerely doubt that the gentlelady from Tennessee understands that in addition to handing out 20,000 pink slips, her amendment would cost the government $4.5 billion over the next 5 years due to the violation of labor agreements. This is a short-sighted amendment. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Anyone else seeking recognition? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Clerk will read.
Page 44, line 15, Next Generation High-Speed Rail. $1,973,000 are hereby permanently rescinded. Northeast Corridor Improvement Program. $4,419,000 are hereby permanently rescinded. Administrative Provisions, Federal Railroad Administration, Section 150. Funds provided for the National Railroad Passenger Corporation shall immediately cease in the event that the corporation contracts to have serious services provided from any location outside the United States. Section 151. The Secretary may receive and expend cash and utilize spare parts from non-United States government sources to repair damages. Section 152. The Secretary is authorized to allow the issuer of any preferred stock sold to the Department to redeem such stock. Section 153. None of the funds provided to the National Railroad Passenger Corporation may be used to fund any overtime costs in excess of $35,000 for any individual employee. Federal Transit Administration administrative expenses, $102,713,000. Transit formula grants, liquidation of contract authority, limitation on obligations, Highway Trust Fund, $9,500,000,000. Research, development, demonstration, and deployment program, $20 million. Transit Cooperative Research Program, $4 million. Technical Assistance and Standards Development, $4 million. Human Resources and Training, $2 million. Capital Investment Grants, $1,815,655,000.
Gentleman from New York, rise.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Nadler of New York, page 49, line 13.
Clerk will suspend. For what purpose the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman's point of order is reserved. Clerk will continue to report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Nadler of New York, page 49, line 13. After the dollar amount, insert increase by $127,283,000.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of my amendment to increase transit funding for capital grant investment grants, also known as the New Starts program, by $127 million, which would bring it to the same level as the bill currently being considered in the Senate. Earlier this year, almost 100 members joined me in sending a letter to the Appropriations Committee requesting funding for transit at a minimum at the level authorized in the authorizing legislation, MAP 21, and in the President's request. In one of the few bright spots in this bill, transit formula grants are funded at the MAP 21 authorized level, in large part because the formula grants are funded out of the mass transit account of the Highway Trust Fund. Unfortunately, the New Starts and Small Starts program, which comes out of general revenue and funds the construction of new fixed guideway systems, such as new subway lines, bus rapid transit, and light rail, is cut 7% below the inactive level and 8% below the President's request. This shows, by the way, how important it is that the amendment, or that the provision in the Republican bill that became, in last year's Republican bill, that would have cut regular mass transit funds out of the Highway Trust Fund and subjected it to appropriations, was defeated, because otherwise we'd have addressed the cut there too. This bill is out of step with the demands of the American people. According to the American Public Transportation Association, a record 10.5 billion trips were taken last year, the second highest annual ridership since 1957. This increase in ridership is occurring all over the country in places like Michigan, Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, Arizona, and Utah, to name just a few. Despite the increase in ridership, federal transportation funding is not keeping up with demand. Public transportation agencies all across the country are facing possible job cuts, maintenance backlogs, service reductions, and fare hikes. The funding levels in this bill provide barely enough to meet our existing commitments to projects currently under construction, and there is a small amount of money for only a few new small starts. The funding level is too low to adequately finance planning and development of additional transit projects. The policy framework in this bill is one of attrition and contraction, to provide just enough money to close out the old projects with no plans to invest in major new transit systems in any meaningful way in the future. It is not adequately investing in building new capacity and expanding transit service around this country. But I suppose that is the point, to slowly starve these programs to the point that they cease to be effective and then argue that they are not necessary. But I am optimistic that we will ultimately provide greater funding for transit. This is an issue that historically has had bipartisan support. Many of my Republican friends joined me in protecting the transit funding guarantees during consideration of surface transportation legislation last year and in defeating the leadership's attempt to eliminate it. The business community and the real estate industry support funding for public transportation, along with a wide range of labor, civil rights, environmental, and civic organizations. Public transportation has broad support all over the country because people understand that investing in transit is one of the smartest things we can do to create jobs right here in America, to reduce congestion and dependence on foreign oil, and to spur economic growth. My amendment would increase the New Starts program by $127 million, which is a modest amount considering how much we should be investing in our infrastructure. But it would at least it would put the House bill on equal footing with the Senate. Unfortunately, there's no account to use as an offset that wouldn't cause significant harm to other important programs, and therefore I have offered none. I understand the Chairman may insist upon raising a point of order, and this just shows the limitations under which we are working within this impossible bill, in which there is grossly inadequate funding all around, so that you can't responsibly ask for an offset without destroying mass transit or something else that is of great import in order to support adequate expenditures. But I urge my colleagues to support increasing transit funding in whatever final product for FY14 appropriations becomes law. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I insist on my point of order. Mr. Chairman, the amendment proposes a net increase in budget authority in the bill. The amendment is not in order under Section 3D3 of House Resolution 5, 113th Congress, which states, and I quote, "It shall not be in order to consider an amendment to a general appropriations bill proposing a net increase in budget authority in the bill unless considered en bloc with another amendment or amendments proposing an equal or greater decrease in such budget authority pursuant to Clause 2F of Rule 21." End quote. The amendment proposes a net increase in budget authority in the bill in violation of such section. It would increase budget authority by $127,383,000. And I ask for a ruling of the Chair.
Does anyone else wish to be heard on the point of order? The Chair will rule. The gentleman from Iowa makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York violates Section 3D3 of House Resolution 5. Section 3D3 establishes a point of order against an amendment proposing a net increase in budget authority in the pending bill. As persuasively asserted by the gentleman from Iowa, the amendment proposes a net increase in budget authority in the bill. Therefore, the point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. Clerk will read.
Page 49, line 14, grants to the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority $125 million.
What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Garrett of New Jersey, page 49, line 18, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $125 million. Page 150, line 8, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $125 million.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, it was my impression that this House had put an end to earmarks. And yet, here we have. The Transportation HUD appropriation bills contains $125 million solely for the benefit of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, also now WMATA. This is just a fraction, mind you, of the $1.5 billion that Congress intends to give the D.C. Metro system over a 10-year period. Now, this is not just your everyday average earmark. You know, the Heritage Foundation has dubbed this subsidy the largest earmark in American history. So I have an amendment here at the desk, and it's very simple. It would simply eliminate this subsidy, eliminate this earmark that has received subsidies since 2008. Why do I do this? At a time of record budget deficits and debt, the American people cannot afford to provide yet again another earmark, another special subsidy, especially when you take into consideration the fact that the D.C. Metro already receives funds from a variety of other federal sources, from other Federal Transit Administration grants and programs. And also, you add to that, given the performance of this agency, I find it absolutely astounding that the American people should want to give even more money of their hard-earned cash to this agency. In addition to their daily service interruptions, their lax management, their poor general performance, the Metro has a significant record also of wasting money. Right here in the Washington Post, it was reported that Metro spent $382 million to do what? To build cars, only to have them now break down even more often than the cars that they didn't overhaul. The Post also pointed out that when senior agency attorneys wanted new offices for themselves, they spent almost over $250,000 to accommodate them. And why not? It's simply our money, taxpayers' money being used. Last year it was reported that the Office of Inspector General uncovered several personal and unwanted expenses on Metro's credit cards, such as $2,000 for gift cards, things like camcorders valued at $730, $180 for headphones. So even when they spend this money on things they should be spending on, the facts are really disturbing. The federal government pays, mind you, over half, specifically 56% of their capital costs already. Now, I understand that we'll hear others who say that, look, D.C., the nation's capital, it's a tourist destination, and it has a large population as well that utilize it for public transportation to get to work. But this is nothing unique about this city. Same could be said back for cities back in my neck of the woods like New York City or over in Chicago or Philadelphia, Boston, Los Angeles. Should they all get the same earmarks as well? What is it that is unique about Washington, D.C., ironically, that they are the only ones that get this type of earmark? Congress should not be forced to make the taxpayers use their hard-earned money to subsidize a transportation system that has failed over the years to get its fiscal house in order. We owe it to the American people to be better than that. Thank you, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman may not reserve. He can yield.
Yield.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I just very briefly will rise in opposition to the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I understand our friend from New Jersey apparently doesn't like Metro or the clientele it serves. So much of what he said, I think, distorts. I will in a bit. So much of what he said is in fact distorted. The metro system in metropolitan Washington is one of the great success stories of regional cooperation in the United States of America. In less than 40 years, this system has created the second highest transit utilization in the United States. New York is well over 120 years old. We're less than 40. In addition, my friend talked about taxpayer money. Not a dime of federal money sustains or subsidizes Metro's operating costs. That's a problem because 40% of the federal workforce uses Metro every day. And it is subsidized not by the federal government, I say to my friend from New Jersey, but by local governments in the metropolitan area. I know because I was chairman of one of them. And I had to write that check every year for the subsidy for Metro, not the federal government, Fairfax County's government. And we were happy to write the check because we saw the value in Metro. Metro also has the highest fare box recovery rate in the United States of any transit system. Subsidies, we recover 80% through the fare box. It's the most efficient recovery in the United States. It lacks a dedicated source of revenue. It's the only major transit system in the United States that lacks a dedicated source of revenue. That's why I say to my friend from New Jersey, my Republican predecessor introduced this legislation you want to cut. Tom Davis was the chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He was a Republican congressman from Virginia, from the 11th District of Virginia I now am privileged to represent. And he and I saw eye to eye on this subject. We needed federal help, and the federal government had a special responsibility because this is the nation's capital. 12 million visitors use that metro system at some point or another during the course of a year, unsubsidized by the federal government. In fact, the only subsidy we ever get is every 4 years when there's an inauguration, there's some consideration made. Other than that, we're kind of on our own. And so Tom Davis, my Republican predecessor, felt, as did all of us in the region, that there was a special obligation to at least help on capital improvements because it's an aging system. And with that aging system, elevators need to be replaced, escalators need to be improved, canopies need to be replaced. And so we came up with a capital improvement idea. And the deal was this, in a Republican Congress, that if the local governments would come up with a match, dollar for dollar, we, the federal government, would provide $150 million a year for that capital improvement to get new cars that are safer so we can avoid the kind of tragedy that occurred a few years ago in the system because we have original cars still in the system from almost 40 years ago. And so the local governments came up with that match, $150 million, 50 for Maryland, 50 for D.C., 50 for Virginia. And we amended the compact, the contract that created Metro, to put federal representatives on the board for the first time with voting privileges. If we adopt this amendment today, we turn our back on that Republican idea, that Republican legislation, and we turn our back on the faith that the local jurisdictions have expressed in keeping their commitment as part of this bargain. Metro is a very important part of our nation's capital, and it is wrong to disinvest in it, and it's even wronger to break a contract, a commitment we made several years ago when my Republican predecessor introduced this legislation. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Full person gentleman from Georgia, rise.
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield whatever time he may consume to my friend from New Jersey.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for whatever time he may consume.
And thank you. And I only do so because the gentleman failed to yield to me any time, as he indicated he would. The gentleman first begins his comments by attacking my motives in this matter, saying that, what did he say? I do not care about for lines such as Metro or the people it serves. I would ask the gentleman who's not paying any attention to me, exactly what is it in my statement would say that I do not care about the people that it serves, because I do care about them as much as I care about the subway system and the metro system in my metro area, such as New York City, or in my metro area, such as down in Newark, New Jersey. I care about them as well. But you know, when I go back and I talk to those people who use those services, whether they be residents of New Jersey or residents of New York, or maybe they're residents of Virginia from your neck of the woods up here who come to visit the financial capital of the world, New York City, or the Garden State of New Jersey, who want to use our metro systems, they ask me why it is that D.C. gets a special deal, why D.C. gets $1.5 billion over 10 years for their system, why D.C., let's get the facts straight as far as the subsidy for the capital cost of 65%, and why these are cities in our area. What is it so unique and special about this area that, and not about Chicago or Philadelphia or the other areas? So I go to my first question. What is it in my statement that you said you could slander me, sir, by saying that I do not care about the people who ride on these systems?
I would say to my friend from New Jersey, I do not question his motivation. I question his action. And his action suggests, just as he just said, we're no different than any other transit system. Well, we are different. This is the nation's capital, and we bear the full responsibility of moving the federal workforce, the bulk of the federal workforce, to work every single day. That is not a responsibility the New York subway system bears. It's not the responsibility Boston bears, or the BART system in San Francisco bears. It is unique, and we bear the responsibility in this region of welcoming 10 to 12 million fellow Americans every year to visit the nation's capital, many of whom use that metro system. Again, something that is subsidized on an operating basis by the local taxpayer. That is unique to this area.
Well, if you're claiming my time, if I had some of the charts showing where some of the wealthiest districts are in the nation, where despite the turmoil of '08 and the financial crisis, where prices of real estate continue to rise, where revenues continue to go up, you would be in this section of the country. Not in Boston, not in Philly, not in New York or in Patterson or Newark, but this is one of the wealthiest portions of the country. And you're right, sir. If this is an area that should look for subsidies, it should look for subsidies from some of the wealthiest people in America that live right here. Not under the underlying bill. It's not asking for people from your district to pay their fair share, or the people from Maryland or Virginia to pay their fair share. It's asking for people from all across the country to chip in to pay for here, when you're not allowing the people from New York, Newark, Philadelphia, Chicago, out in California, those other areas have subway systems and metro systems. You're not willing to help them out, but you want everyone else, Mr. Speaker, you want everybody else in America to help the residents who live here and subsidize their cost, but you're not willing to help out the people who live in my neck of the woods. And that, sir, is unfair to my constituents. That's fair to all the constituents in all those cities that are looking for a fair deal and for efficiency and economy from our government, and not for special deals. And I'll end where I began. I thought Washington had done away with earmarks, but obviously with this legislation and the special interests that are being catered to here, we have not done so. And with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia.
And I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back. The gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Will suspend. The gentleman will suspend. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume in the amendments on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment by Mr. Gallagher of Texas, amendment by Mr. Young of Alaska, amendment by Mr. Grayson of Florida, amendment number 4 by Mr. McClintock of California, amendment by Mr. Hastings of Florida, amendment by Mr. Hastings of Florida, and amendment by Mr. Hastings of Florida. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gallagher, on which the further proceedings were postponed and which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Gallego of Texas.
A recorded vote having been requested, those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, support the request for a recorded vote will. That sufficient number of recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been debating their fifth appropriations bill for fiscal year 2014. It's the bill that covers the transportation and housing departments for the fiscal year ahead, which starts on October 1st. An hour of general debate earlier, and they've considered a number of amendments. 7 of those amendments will get votes here, including this first one, a 15-minute vote by Representative Gallego, which would ensure that 10 million plus, nearly 11 million, is available for the intelligence response under Transportation Department. It's a 15-minute vote. Over in the Senate, meanwhile, they too have been working some on their transportation bill, their fiscal year 2014 transportation bill. Niels Lesniewski, who covers the Senate for Roll Call, said that the majority leader has filed cloture on their bill. His CQ Roll Call colleague Kerry Young wrote this afternoon that Senate Republican leaders intend to block passage of the fiscal 2014 transportation HUD spending bill in order to emphasize their objections to Democratic spending levels ahead of a larger September budget battle on a broad stopgap funding bill. That's from a CQ Roll Call this afternoon. And for a look ahead at the debate in the House and Senate on transportation and other issues, we spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter.
Taylor is the Budget and Appropriations reporter for the Associated Press. Well, the House and Senate are back to work this week on a government spending bill for transportation and housing programs. What can you tell us about the measures being considered?
Well, the first thing to know is that they're very, very different. This is an unusual year in the appropriations process because the House is working from a very much lower figure for the grand total for the bills than the Senate is, and this is because the House is incorporating these across-the-board cuts known as sequestration. They're anticipating they continue, whereas the Senate is incorporating an assumption that a deal will be worked out, and they're writing the bills to that level. So this transportation and housing bill is a prime example of the choices that are being made when the House works from a much lower figure. For instance, they really cut community development grants that are very popular with mayors across the country. They cut Amtrak subsidies. They're not able to do as much for road and bridge repair. And in the Senate, the Democrats who control the chamber over there are trying to demonstrate that, well, look, our bill will do more to create jobs. It will do more to house people. But what's going on in the mismatch really is just sort of a preliminary to a showdown that's going to happen later on this year.
How unusual is it that both chambers are considering their individual versions of this legislation at the same time?
Well, it's very unusual for the simple starting point that the Senate hasn't considered a standalone appropriations bill in something like 2 years. And, whether or not, I mean, typically the House is supposed to go first, send a bill over, the Senate picks it up, they get on the same, all this inside Congress stuff. But the fact that they're doing it at the same time is really more of a coincidence.
You mentioned a few of them. What are some of the key issues coming up in debate?
Well, I think there's going to be efforts to restore some of the cuts on the House side to things like subsidized housing, Amtrak, and the like. But, under the rules, you need to find money someplace else to replace a cut. And the House measure is so sort of starkly written. It's something like 20% or so below the levels that were passed in March, give or take a few percentage points, that it's going to be really hard to move much money around and create or to quote-unquote fix some of the problems that people who support these programs see with the bill.
As you know, the Congress is set to start their 5-week summer break at the end of this week. What kind of progress are they making on the list of the dozen spending bills that fund the federal government?
Not very much. This will be the 5th one to pass the House, and if the Senate manages to pass it, it'll be the 1st. I mean, the appropriations process has been going on, but they're really just kind of marking time. I mean, quite frankly, until they figure out some sort of broader budget solution, these bills don't really amount to very much as far as the way things are going to turn out in the end. So they're going to need what we call a stopgap measure or a continuing resolution in September, and that's going to be tricky. But, you know, I wrote a story last week which suggests that, you know, if you hear about all this talk about possibly a government shutdown at the end of September, maybe to view that kind of talk skeptically so far.
So what exactly is the conflict? What spending levels is each chamber using, and how far apart are they?
Well, as I was saying, I mean, the Senate is using an overall cap. And remember, we're talking about what is known as discretionary spending. This is what Congress passes each year to do sort of day-to-day operating budgets. You know, Medicare and Social Security is in a whole different box. And they have chosen a spending level of $1.058 trillion, I believe. And the House is using a spending level that's like $91 or $92 billion less. And inside that 91 and 92 billion, they move money from domestic programs to help the Pentagon out. So, you know, these domestic spending bills like this transportation and housing bill are vastly different depending on which chamber is producing them.
How involved is the Obama administration as Congress gets closer to its deadline for getting the spending bills done?
They don't seem to be very involved, quite frankly. I think they're anticipating in the fall some sort of catalyst that gets a broader budget negotiation going. Now, Republicans think the need to raise the debt limit is going to provide that spark. But the president is going around saying, well, look, you know, 2 years ago, which parenthetically he was getting ready to run for re-election, he accepted all of these spending cuts as a condition for increasing the borrowing cap. And if you don't increase the borrowing cap, then pretty soon you can't pay off your bondholders, you can't pay Social Security recipients. It's a real economic catastrophe. And he's saying he's not going to be held hostage to the threat of that catastrophe again. So we have a conflict right now, between the Republicans who control the House and the Obama administration, and everybody is kind of hoping that as the fall goes on, they find a way to sort of massage that, and you get a negotiation going that gets this budget agreement, some kind of budget agreement worked out, so you can, you know, alleviate some of these sequestration cuts and, you know, do some real budgeting for some of these agencies.
Reporter Andrew Taylor of the Associated Press, we thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
And in particular on the transportation bill, Kerry Young of CQ Roll Call writing that in the Senate, Democrats have proceeded with annual appropriations bills as if the sequester were no longer in effect, and the cap on fiscal 2014 discretionary spending would be restored to its original $1.058 trillion level. Senate Republican Conference Chairman John Thune of South Dakota, she writes, said today that Republicans intend to, quote, draw a line in the sand to highlight their opposition to that approach. The Senate has their own version of the transportation bill. The House here voting on at least 7 amendments that they've debated so far. This first amendment vote, 15 minutes. This is by Representative Gallego of Texas, a Democrat, which would ensure that nearly $11 million is available for intelligence, security, and emergency response under the Transportation Office of Secretary. It's a 15-minute vote. President Obama was out of Washington today in Chattanooga at the Amazon Fulfillment Center talking about the economy. He announced a proposal there for tying changes in the corporate tax code with increased spending for infrastructure and education. We're going to bring you the President's comments while this vote continues.
Jobs are about more than just paying the bills. Jobs are about more than just statistics. You know, we've never just defined having a job as having a paycheck here in America. A job is a source of pride. It's a source of dignity. It's the way you look after your family. It's proof that you're doing the right things and meeting your responsibilities and contributing to the fabric of your community and helping to build the country. That's what a job's all about. It's not just about a paycheck. It's not just about paying the bills. It's also about knowing that what you're doing is important, that it counts. So we should be doing everything we can as a country to create more good jobs that pay good wages, period. Now, Now, here's the thing, Chattanooga. The problem is not that we don't have ideas about how we could create even more jobs. We've got a lot of ideas out there. There are plenty of independent economists, plenty of business owners, people from both parties agree on some of the ingredients that we need for creating good jobs. And you've heard them debated again and again over these past few years. I've proposed a lot of these ideas myself. Just 2 years ago, I announced the American Jobs Act, full of ideas that every independent economist said would create more jobs. Some were passed by Congress, but I got to admit, most of them weren't. Sometimes there were ideas that historically had Republican support, and for some reason suddenly Republicans didn't want to support them anymore. Putting people back to work, rebuilding America's infrastructure, equipping our kids and our workers with the best skills, leading the world in scientific research that helps to pave the way for new jobs and new industries, accelerating our clean energy and natural gas revolutions, fixing a broken immigration system so that American workers aren't undercut, undermined because some businesses are unscrupulous and hiring folks and not paying them decent wages. Independent economists say immigration reform would boost our economy by more than $1 trillion. So we've got ideas out there we know can work. And if we don't make these investments, if we don't make these reforms, then we might as well be waving the white flag to the rest of the world, because they're moving forward. They're not slowing down. China, Germany, India, they're going. And we can't just sit by and do nothing. Doing nothing doesn't help the middle class. So today I came here to offer a framework that might help break through some of the political logjam in Washington, try to get Congress to start moving on some of these proven ideas. But let me briefly outline some of the areas I think we need to focus on if we want to create good jobs with good wages in durable industries, areas that will fuel our future growth. Number one, jobs in American manufacturing. You know, over the past 4 years, for the first time since the 1990s, the number of manufacturing jobs in America hasn't gone down, it's actually gone up. So the trend lines are good. Now we've got to build on that progress. I want to offer new incentives for manufacturers, not to ship jobs overseas, but to bring them back here to America. I want new tax credits so communities hit hardest by plant closures can attract new investment. In my State of the Union address, I asked Congress to build on a successful pilot program we've set up. We want to create not just 15 manufacturing innovation institutes that connect businesses and universities and federal agencies to help communities left behind by global competition to become centers of high-tech jobs. Today I'm asking Congress to build on this bipartisan support and triple that number from 15 to 45. These hubs where we're getting businesses, universities, communities all to work together to develop centers of high-tech industries all throughout the United States that allow us to be at the forefront of the next revolution of manufacturing. I want it made here in the United States of America. I don't want that happening overseas. Number two, I talked about this last week, jobs rebuilding our infrastructure. You know, I look at this amazing facility, and you guys, you don't miss a beat. I mean, you got these packages coming out, and you've got dog food and Kindles and beard trimmers, and I mean, there's all kinds of stuff around here. But once it's packed up, it's got to get to the customer. And how quickly and how dependably it gets to the customer depends on, do we have good roads? Do we have good bridges? Do we have state-of-the-art airports? We've got about $2 trillion of deferred maintenance here in this country. So let's put more construction workers back on the job doing the work America needs done. These are vital projects that Amazon needs, businesses all across the country need, like widening Route 27 here in Chattanooga, deepening the Jacksonville port that I visited last week. These are projects vital to our national pride. You know, we're going to be breaking ground this week at the St. Louis Arch. You know, Congress should pass what I've called my Fix It First plan, to put people to work immediately on our most urgent repairs, like the 100,000 bridges that are old enough to qualify for Medicare. That will create good middle-class jobs right now. Right now. And we should partner with the private sector to upgrade what businesses like Amazon need most. We should have a modern air traffic control system to keep planes running on time. We should have modern power grids and pipelines to survive a storm. We should have modern schools to prepare our kids for the jobs of tomorrow. Number three, we need to keep creating good jobs in energy. In wind and solar and natural gas, those new energy sources are reducing energy costs. They're reducing dangerous carbon pollution. They're reducing our dependence on foreign oil. So now's not the time to gut investments in American technology. Now's the time to double down on renewable energy and biofuels and electric vehicles and to put money into the research that will shift our cars and trucks off oil for good. And let me tell you, cheaper costs of natural gas is a huge boost to our businesses here in America. So we should develop it even more. We've got to do it in a way that protects our air and our water for our children and future generations, but we can do that. We've got the technology to do it. Number four, we've got to export more. We want to send American goods all around the world. You know, a year ago I signed a new trade agreement with Korea, because they were selling a lot of Hyundais here, but we weren't selling a lot of, you know, GM cars over there. Since we signed that deal, our big three automakers are selling 18% more cars in Korea than they were. So now we got to help more of our businesses do the same thing. I'm asking Congress for the authority to negotiate the best trade deals possible for our workers and combine it with robust training and assistance measures to make sure our workers have the support and the skills they need for this new global competition. And we're going to have to sharpen our competitive edge in the global job marketplace. You know, 2 years ago, we created something called Select USA. This is a coordinated effort to attract foreign companies looking to invest and create jobs here in the United States. And today I'm directing my cabinet to expand these efforts. And this October, I'm going to bring business leaders from around the world, and I'm going to connect them to state leaders and local leaders like your mayor, who are ready to prove there's no better place to do business than right here in the United States of America. Number five, let's do more to help the more than 4 million long-term unemployed Americans that are out there. You know, one of the problems that happens is a lot of folks, they lose their jobs during this really bad recession through no fault of their own. They've got what it takes to fill that job opening, but because they've been out of work so long, employers won't even give their application a fair look. So I'm challenging CEOs to do more to get these Americans back on their feet. And I'm going to bring together the CEOs and companies that are putting in place some of the best practices for recruiting and training and hiring workers who've been out of work for a long time but want the chance to show that they're ready to go back to work. And, you know, at the same time, I'm calling on our businesses to do more for their workers. You know, Amazon is a great example of what's possible. What you're doing here at Amazon with your Career Choice program pays 95% of the tuition for employees who want to earn skills in fields with high demand. Not just, by the way, jobs here at Amazon, but jobs anywhere. Computer-aided design or nursing. I talked to Jeff Bezos yesterday, and he was so proud of the fact that he wants to see every employee at Amazon continually upgrade their skills and improve. And if they've got a dream they want to pursue, Amazon wants to help them pursue it. That's the kind of approach that we need from America's businesses. You know, offering training programs, health care, retirement plans, paying better wages, that's not just the right thing to do, it's actually good for your bottom line. A recent study shows that when a company makes the list of the 100 best companies to work for in America, its share price outperforms its competitors. Because, you know, the stock market and investors, they know if a company has employees that are motivated and happy, that business is more likely to succeed. That business is more likely to succeed. And because nobody who works full-time in America should have to live in poverty, I'm going to keep on making the case and fighting for the fact that we need to raise our minimum wage, because right now it's in lower terms than it was when Ronald Reagan took office. You know, when folks have more money in their pockets, that's good for Amazon. It means your customers have a little more money. They can order a little more of that protein powder. I noticed a lot of folks were ordering protein powder. Everybody's trying to get bulked up. So those are some of the ideas that we're out there, we're promoting. We're not lacking for ideas. We're just lacking action, especially out of Washington. You know, for most of the past 2 years, Washington has just taken its eye off the ball when it comes to the middle class. And I'll tell you, look, there are a growing number of, the good news is there are a growing number of Republican senators who are trying to work with Democrats to get some stuff done. That's good news. The bad news is that rather than keep our focus on what should be our priority, which is growing our economy and creating good middle-class jobs, we've seen a certain faction of Republicans in Congress hurt a fragile recovery by saying that they wouldn't pay the very bills that Congress racked up in the first place, threatening to shut down the people's government if they can't get rid of Obamacare. Instead of reducing our deficits with a scalpel to get rid of programs we don't need but keep vital investments that we do, you know, this same group has kept in place this meat cleaver called the sequester that is just slashing all kinds of important investments in education and research and our military. You know, all the things that are needed to make this country a magnet for good middle-class jobs, those things are being cut. And these moves don't just hurt our economy in the long term, they hurt our middle class right now. The independent Congressional Budget Office estimates that the cuts that are being made right now in Washington will cost our economy 750,000 jobs this year, 900,000 fewer jobs next year. And a lot of the jobs at risk are at small businesses that contract with our military or our federal agencies. Over the past 4 years, another 700,000 workers at the federal, state, and local levels of government have lost their jobs. These are cops and firefighters. And about half of them are people who work in our schools. Those are real jobs. It doesn't help a company like Amazon when a teacher or a cop or a firefighter loses their job. They don't have money to place an order. That's hundreds of thousands of customers who have less money to spend. If those layoffs had not happened, if public sector employees grew like they did the past 2 recessions, the unemployment rate would be 6.5 instead of 7.5. Our economy would be much better off, and the deficit would still be going down because we'd be getting more tax revenue. So the point is, if Washington spent as much time and energy these past 2 years figuring out how to grow our economy and grow our middle class as it spent manufacturing crises in pursuit of a cut-at-all-costs approach to deficits, we'd be much better off. We'd be much better off. And it's not like we don't have to cut our deficits. As a share of the economy, we've cut our deficits by nearly half since I took office. Half. And they're projected to go down even further. But there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And we should do it in a way that actually helps middle-class families instead of hurts them.
President Obama earlier today in Chattanooga. All of that in our video library at cspan.org. The House floor, it's the first of 7 amendment votes to the 2014 Transportation and HUD spending bill. So 6 more votes after this. They'll all be 2-minute votes.
On this vote, the yeas are 317, the nays are 92. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, on which further proceedings were postponed, in which the yeas prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Young of Alaska.
A recorded vote having been requested, those in support of a recorded vote will rise to be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Congressman Don Young's amendment would exempt Alaska and Hawaii from the prohibition on essential air service for communities with a per-passenger subsidy rate over $500. We showed you President Obama a few minutes ago. He will be up on Capitol Hill tomorrow, meeting first with House Democrats and then House Republicans. We'll have crews on the Hill, as we always do, and get any comments that may come after meetings with the President.
25. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson, on which the further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerks will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Grayson of Florida.